Hey, I decided to wear a shirt today.
What?
Yeah. Look, you wore a shirt too. We're twinsies. We didn't even talk about this in advance. It's amazing. Hey, welcome to Polite Fight. I'm John Tatey, your editor-in-chief. I'm here with Gus Spellman, as always, and we are going to talk about Home, the second episode of the 6th season of the HBO television program, Game of Thrones. This is one of the gloomiest episodes of Game of Thrones, which is not typically a bright rainbow show to begin with. I think that this opening scene sets up an important contrast aesthetically for the episode. You could not be gloomier in this cave, right? And then it cuts to Winterfell, and the contrast makes Winterfell seem bright. This Winterfell of the past seem bright. I think that the relatively bright lighting positions it in the past for us because all the gloom of the rest of the episode is giving us the sensation of winter is coming, right? And don't forget that the entire series opens up on this type of scene. So it not only transports you to the past of the world, but transports you to the past of the show, I think quite potently. Hey, can I talk about some twiddly editing stuff? Just
sure.
tiny editing details I want to talk about
That's
here.
my favorite stuff.
I know, right? So we have this shot of dead Jon Snow with laughter over it, right?
Hey!
And this is such a nice cut because if it had been just a straight cut, I think, to King's Landing and then with this laughter matching the visual, you might have felt cheery. You might have felt like it's a real break and a change of mood. But the fact that we get laughter over this shot of a corpse makes it feel unsettling.
I buy that. It helps you feel like even though these two stories are completely separate, there's really nothing connecting them.
Right.
That there's some sort of emotional thread that's being drawn through the entire episode. You know, it feels like this is all part of the same story, even if these two plots are not connected.
That's one nice way to begin a scene in this episode. Another nice kickoff to a scene is, so we have the zombie mountain. Right after he kills the guy, we cut to this close-up of Cersei pulling a thread out of her outfit here. And to me, that cut spoke quite directly to what just happened. And it's almost as if we can see Cersei slowly coming apart at the seams. She has this enforcer now, this otherworldly enforcer. It feels to me like Cersei is so bent on revenge and death that she is pulling herself apart.
Really? I actually feel like we're starting to see a turn in Cersei where she's decided that like all this general conniving evil revenge stuff has not really been working. Like I think you can see in the last episode the way that Jaime says like we're gonna kill them all and we're the only two people in the world that matter. That you can see that she's not like, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I don't know, I'm curious to see.
What about this thread then? What do you make of this shot?
It's interesting. To me, I feel like it's her noticing like all the trappings around me, all the stuff around me is sort of coming apart. You know, we saw her at the end of the last season, obviously totally naked, and so here's her fiddling with her like clothing, and you know, it makes me feel like maybe even though that experience was like a horrible ordeal for her, that maybe she's a little more in touch with herself now. I don't know.
I think the way where I thought you were going with it is we did have that shame sequence at the end of last season, and we had in the first episode of this season the Red Woman stripping everything away to expose her true self, right? So maybe that's a theme of women finding themselves by removing their clothes in this tiny way or in the more dramatic way we saw last week and last season.
So you mentioned the mountain. And somebody had a really great comment, I thought, about that head smash moment. Underscorex said that was some shockingly Looney Tunes violence between Mountain smashing that dude's head and 1-1 the Giant slamming that Watchman into the wall. Yeah. Which I thought was true. It is very like splatty Looney Tunes. It's interesting to sort of compare that, I think, with the Ramsay violence, because that violence is not Looney Tunes at all. And we're not going to talk about the dog scene. Don't worry, I know that you as a new father don't want to talk about that scene. We'll leave it be. But you know, even the scene where he stabs Roose, you know, feels like a totally different type of violence.
Right. And I think it's psychologically impactful in a way that the head smash and the archer smash against the wall are not. We talked about gratuitous nudity last week, and I think we could, by the same token, talk about gratuitous violence this
Sure,
week.
yeah.
But there's different varieties of it, right? I have to admit, like, I don't have as much of a problem with the head smash or the wall smash. And why is that? Like,
they're fun.
But if you enjoy the cartoony violence, are you to some degree complicit in the violence that so many people in the comments online elsewhere were horrified by this by the dog attack?
Yeah, I think so. And I also don't think Game of Thrones is a show that's interested in holding up the mirror to you and being like, you liked this violence, what about this violence? Like, it's not interested in that.
That was my next question.
You know, I don't think Game of Thrones is interested in that. Not every piece of art has to ask that question of its viewers. But I think that you can't have one without, or you could have one without the other, but it wouldn't be the same show.
I agree. I think that that the show shows different shades of death, and I do feel that the two kinds of violence are linked in that yes, it puts in the cartoony violence to get a sort of shocked laugh or to entertain us. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you enjoy that, I enjoy it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But I think that it does have that counterweight to remind us, hey, these are human beings, and hey, this is a really brutal world. Don't forget, it's not all fun and games and laughs here. I feel like I am now sort of justifying the Ramsay Bolton dog sequence, and maybe I kind of am. Maybe we do need to feel that misery for the overall death on the show to still feel real and have an impact on us.
So I want to talk about not the dog scene, the way that Ramsay kills Roose. I thought that was a really interesting scene in that I think it's the only time where we've seen Ramsay hurt somebody or kill somebody where he hasn't like enjoyed it. You know, when he stabs his dad, he doesn't even look at his dad dying. Everyone else, he's there to watch and he loves it. Even in this scene with the dogs, he's looking on and he's loving it. But with his dad, he actually turns his head away. And I thought, you know, I think that you can see that like Ramsay does have some emotional complexity to this guy. I think that he wanted to be Roose's actual heir, and it hurts him to have to kill his dad, but he's also a ruthless fucking person.
Boy, emotional complexity to Ramsay Bolton. I buy it. I mean, just because you're comparing these two particular shots here, that there is some heart and there is some pain when he kills Roose. Boy, you're killing me in this segment, Gus. You're making me. Not only did you make me half justify the dog violence scene, but now you're making me
that was
feel
_X.
A modicum of sympathy for Ramsay Bolton. There is some subtlety in the Ramsay Bolton storyline, after all. Let's move on. Okay, we have to talk about the scene.
Yeah.
Last week we talked about the lighting of Melisandre in these scenes and sort of the blue versus the warmth.
On her naked body.
On her naked body, okay? And what strikes me about the composition here, we have this penultimate shot, which is sort of a medium shot here. He's almost entirely covered in this blue and gray tint. As soon as his eyes open, we cut to this close-up of his face, and now the frame has much more of that warmth from the fire coming over it. The color of the composition shifts to match the fact that he's revived.
Yeah, and I think that they did this moment really nicely. However, having said that, this revival scene did not 100% work for me. As everybody's leaving, you're like, okay, well now I just have to wait for them to press the yes button or the no button. And it's like, which button are they gonna press? Especially once everybody leaves, it's like, nobody else's emotions are involved in this scene anymore, so now it's literally just, are they going to press the yes button?
But ours are. I don't agree with that, because our emotions are invested, right? And it's almost as if we have had this build-up, right? They know we've been expecting this moment for the entire off-season. I feel that this moment actually is nice that there's nobody in the room, because it's just our moment alone with Jon Snow. And yes, it's our moment alone with the yes-no button, but that's a deal between, the yes-no thing is fundamentally and most potently a deal between us and the show, right?
I mean, yes, but we just talked about how Game of Thrones is not really a show that likes to hold up the mirror that much and engage the audience directly that way. I don't think that the show generally likes to play in that world.
I don't think
so
it generally
much.
does, but this is such a big thing.
Yeah, I guess it is big enough that maybe it does.
The people, the guys making the show are aware of the super text, right? You have the text of the actual show and you have context, but you also have this super text of all the conversations and all the marketing around the show, and they're aware of that. And I think, I agree with you that they generally don't do this, but I think that this was set up this way in acknowledgement of all the sort of outside tension that's built up over this.
I mean, that's a good point, but then I think that a lot of the scene was misplayed, if that's the idea. For them to choose Davos to be the last person to go out of the room, arguably the person in the room with the least connection to Jon. Him with Jon, I was just like, I don't care that much. And if you try to make something of it, it's going to ring false to me.
Okay, it's hard to argue with that. I mean, the Davos connection is a tough one. I think what the show is doing here is setting up a bond that is going to grow between Davos and Jon Snow 2.0, not entirely earned by what's come before.
Yeah, I think that's what bothers me about it. A greater show would have found a more emotionally resonant way to create that connection.
I agree. All right, that does it for this week's episode. Gus and I will, of course, be back next week to talk about more Game of Thrones. For Gus Spellman, I'm Jon Tatey. So long for now.
Bye, guys.